Jefferson City, Missouri, grew on the banks of the Missouri River in the center of the state. Locally known as Jeff City or JC, it became the state capital in 1821. Missouri was a slave state, with thousands of African Americans held in bondage. After the Civil War, many formerly enslaved people moved to the city.
Yes, we'll gather at the river, river, gather with the saints at the river that flows by the throne of God.
This is the story of the center of the black business, residential, and social community in southeast Jeff City, a neighborhood that thrived for decades from the early 1900s until urban renewal brought its demise in the early 1960s. A place that had a mystique all its own, known locally as The Foot, located on Lafayette Street from Dunklin to Elm Streets near Lincoln University.
In Jefferson City, there was always this mysterious place that everybody talked sort of in a whisper about sometimes, depending on who you're with. If you were with your minister, you didn't talk about it much at all. And if you were with people you knew real well, you would say, "Have you ever been to the Foot?" And it was really strange. Everybody thought the Foot was really something different, but it wasn't. The reason it was called the Foot was because it was at the bottom of Lincoln Hill. Lincoln sits up on a hill, and those 2 blocks known as the Foot were right at the foot of the hill. So they called it the Foot down there. Where are you going? Down on the Foot. And the Foot had all sorts of things. I remember it had 4 barbershops, had restaurants, a hotel, and filling station. There was just everything you needed there at the Foot. And on weekends, there were some things that you didn't need that were at the Foot. But as you got older, the more you enjoyed it. And I learned to really enjoy the Foot.
Well, it was a nice neighborhood to me, you know, and we had our grocery stores and hotel right there and Tops Barbecue, and there's just a lot of things. Jack King's, you know, we'd go in there and get candy, you know, different things. I liked Lafayette Street. It was like a going on street, but it had something going on, yeah.
You hear that saying now, it takes a tribe or it takes a village. That was a village. You had people looking out for each other. You had people looking out for the young people. As I've said before, I've acquired a lot of my knowledge and wisdom from just listening to those older people on Lafayette Street.
I loved every bit of it. I really did. It was safe. It was a community of people that you knew that cared about people. They were neighbors. They would put you in check. If you just didn't even think about doing much, because if you did, they would not only correct you and were comfortable and had permission to do it, they would then let your parents know they did it, and you automatically knew it was okay. So, and it was all out of love. You knew that they didn't want to. It wasn't about hurting or offending you. But the same people that would correct you were also the same people that were teaching you.
Good neighbors. They accepted the students and faculty, and we accepted them. In fact, I'd walk through Lafayette Street from my girlfriend's house holding hands. And you're talking about 51 and 52. Everybody spoke to each other because along the Lafayette Street, there was not only just a few commercial, but people's homes was next to a gas station, a restaurant. So it was a close community, and people respected each other.
Following the end of the Civil War and slavery in Missouri, many blacks began relocating from farms to cities where they could find jobs working at hard physical labor or in demanding domestic service positions. Jobs in riverside towns included loading freight aboard steamboats plying the Mississippi and Missouri rivers. Jefferson City, as the state capital and important trade center for central Missouri, attracted African American men looking for steady wages on the wharf. Black families moving to Jefferson City first settled uptown where they were close to their jobs on the wharf or other manual labor positions, and close to the hotels and homes of wealthy white merchants where they worked as maids or servants. Many lived in a place called Logan's Landing or on Hog Alley, not far from the state capitol building. But by the 1890s, the white establishment began efforts to encourage black citizens to relocate away from the city center. By 1900, more than half of the African American families in Jefferson City had relocated to an area at the southeast edge of the city limits near Lincoln Institute, a black college founded in 1866 by Union Army Civil War veterans of the 62nd and 65th Colored Infantries. This new location for the black community was more acceptable to the white population of Jefferson City and consistent with the continuing segregation efforts of white community leaders. Lincoln Institute became Lincoln University in 1921 and employed many of the surrounding residents of the growing African American neighborhood at the foot of the hill that Lincoln stood upon. The relationship between the neighborhood known as the Foot and Lincoln University was complex. While the university supported the community with jobs, as well as a high school and a graded teaching laboratory school known as Lincoln Lab for black children, Lincoln University students were officially discouraged from visiting certain areas of the Foot. Although the students didn't always pay close attention to the administration's direction for their free time, Foot residents watched over the Lincoln University students who were often far from home and short on cash.
When I arrived here in September of 1951, I had high impressions of Lincoln. The faculty and staff and students at Lincoln who were cornered up on the campus would come down for whatever activities they could encounter. It got the name The Foot from the folks on the campus. And as I see it, and as I said, in 51, we didn't have about 600 students at Lincoln, football team, basketball, and on the weekends, if we were not participating in some sport, you had to have something to do. So we'd go down to the bottom of the hill and have a beer, find a place to eat, something like that.
The lab school went to 8th grade, and then you were on campus with other college students. Automatically made you want to go to college. It's been said, that, Lincoln University was separated from the Black community or there's a higher status. No, it wasn't. Those same professors and people lived right here. The kids were going to school together. We were all doing the same thing, just like in any other area, but we were working together, building together. Guess what? When you're segregated, that creates a closeness.
Miss Leona Rice owned the Booker T, and there's just no way to describe her other than an earthly angel. She fed as many students from Lincoln as the cafeteria did, and many times she fed them free. And I will never forget, she asked this boy, she said, "Do you want a pork steak sandwich and a bowl of chili?" And he said, "No, Miss Leona, I don't have any money." She said, "Do you want to see the back of my hand? I didn't ask you if you had any money. I asked if you wanted a bowl of chili and a sandwich." And as she was doing all this fuss and she was fixing it together and shoving it right in front of me, he had to eat it. And he better not say anything more about paying her.
The heart of the Foot community on Lafayette Street stretched from Dunklin to Elm, where the black business district was thriving by the 1920s. There were houses mixed in between the businesses, and black folks lived not only on Lafayette Street, but along the intersecting streets in the area. The Foot had churches, a park, and a community center for its residents. This segregated neighborhood included households which could afford city utilities, but others which could not. Even by the 1950s, for some Foot folks, coal stoves, outhouses, and no running water was simply their way of life. Mules pulling vegetable wagons still plodded along Lafayette Street at harvest time. Successful black businesses on the Foot included Tops Barbecue, Turner's Gas Station, Jack King's Store, Wingy's Grocery, 4 barbershops, a hairdresser, photographer, and the crown jewel of the Foot, the Booker T Hotel. The Booker T was not only one of the few places traveling black people could stay in Jeff City, but it also had Miss Leona's Cafe, live jazz, rhythm and blues, and a going-on nightlife.
We had a coal stove in the living room, and we didn't have a toilet. We just had a pot. And then we used the pot, and when we took a bath, we had the round tub for the boys and the oblong one for me and my sister. Of course, we had to heat the water too, so. And in the kitchen, we had like a bucket or a pail, and a dipper, and we just, dipped it in there, drink it, put it back down. Everybody drink, out of the same dipper, They don't probably want to do that today, but, yeah.
Our grandmother had a friend named Mr. Bainham, and he was an old black man that lived across the river, and he raised vegetables. And when harvest season would come, he would come across the river in his wagon, pulled by 2 mules. And when he would get in the neighborhood, maters, taters, and melons. And I used to love when Mr. Bainham would come. And so one day, the 2 mules pulled up in front of our house. And our grandmother was sitting there, and she bought some potatoes and whatever. And I just adored Mr. Bainham because of his 2 mules. I was probably about this tall. And so he looked at me. He said, "Little Glover," he says, "you want to ride on the wagon?" And so I looked back at our grandmother to see if she's going to say, and she said, "Well, he can go to the end of the block." Oh, and I scrambled up this wagon on the wheel, and I got up on the seat, and I was sitting on top of the world, and I'm just looking around. Nobody else is on Mr. Bainham's wagon. And then he looked at me and he says, "You want to drive the mules?" Oh, did it? And so he handed me the reins. He said, "Now you got to hold both of them." I remember, and he said, "You got to hold them like this." And he said, "You whip them like that and go, hup there." I thought, okay, hup there. And all of a sudden the mules started walking. I'm thinking I'm driving these 2 mules. No, the mules knew the route. They would get to the next house, they would stop. And I'm still, and he goes, "You're supposed to yell, whoa." Oh, whoa. And so I got to go to the end of the block. I thought I had been to Mount Everest. I was so happy.
You could stop and sit on the porch of someone on Lafayette Street, stop at Miss White's and visit with her, and she'd walk you from the porch to the street. If you come off the campus at Lincoln and start the corner of Duncan Lafayette going east, you'd have the gas station, the barbecue, the Tops, barber shop, Miss White's home, the home next to that. Then we would have a grocery store, have a cabinet shop, the Booker T, and in the middle of Elm Street, you'd have a little sundry building with a cab stand. The cab stand was right in the middle of the street. From there, you'd have the Logan Shoe Factory, and the next house there would be the Diggs property.
The Booker T Hotel, as my mother used to call it, your second home. There were times down the foot where I ran into Ike and Tina Turner at the Booker T Hotel one time, and I had no idea who they were until I saw him, because at that time he was wearing those funny little bangs across, and I said, "That looks like he got his hair cut just like Ike Turner." They said, "That is Ike Turner, dummy." So I got to meet him and Tina.
It was a place that blacks would come, and they would be able to stay in hotel lodging there. It had a restaurant located on the ground floor. It had all the amenities that you would find in a hotel, but it was for the blacks. And whenever soldiers would come into Jeff City to the black community, the black soldiers, some of them would stay at the Booker T Hotel.
In a club in the basement.
Oh, in a club, yeah. They had a nightclub in the basement of the hotel.
Yeah, that's where, if Ike and Tina came and performed, that's where they came to. I mean, that was the place where, on the weekends, it was normally on the weekends, that they would put on the shows. And I mean, the place would just be packed. I mean, and back in those days, when, like you talking about the soldiers, a place for them to go, Columbia, Jeff City, Fulton, maybe Mexico. They drop them off Friday during the day, Sunday night, bus going back to Fort Leonard. So, as he said, this side, bedside, soldiers, you had to entertain them, Booker T Hotel.
Let's don't go into that path.
Accommodate them. That was just this life. Those guys got just as much fun as coming to Jeff City. Of course, they had to deal with our uncle. because he ran the women and the liquor. So, so
Can we edit that part out?
no, leave it all in there. Leave it all in there. He was a mechanic, pimp, and enforcer.
Change is coming for us all. A change is coming. You can win it in the right direction. You can ask it not to call. But change is coming, coming.
Residents of the Foot community faced the same segregation and racism found throughout America before the Civil Rights Movement. Black citizens were not served in restaurants, bars, hotels, retail stores, or allowed in public swimming pools in Jeff City outside the Foot. Medical care and funeral homes for black people were separate from white facilities. Fraternal organizations were separated, with the Foot neighborhood having its own Masonic lodge for black membership. The decades of segregation, also known as the Jim Crow era, included separated seating areas for blacks in movie theaters, usually the balcony, and public transportation for African Americans was limited to taxicabs operated by black drivers or sitting in the back of Jefferson City buses.
In those days, when you left the black community or you went out of the house, you would be instructed. You don't do this, you don't do that, you do this. You had to listen. Because if we would get out of line and say just any words, yes, sir, yes, ma'am, it was important that we do that, because if we got out of line, somebody could do something to us. See, that's why when we walked from our house on Elm to the Baptist church was how many blocks away? We walked in a line. We didn't veer left. We didn't veer right. We watched across the street. And when she gave us instructions, it was important that we follow those, because she knew what could happen to us if we was to offend somebody. Get on the bus. You go to the back of the bus. You know.
That was one of the earliest memories I had of riding the city bus in Jefferson City. I can't say how old I was, but I know that I was young enough that I had to climb up on the first step of the bus. That's how little I was. And as I was climbing up on the steps, I remember our grandmother pulling me back off the step. And she said, "Don't you get in front of that white lady." Now, didn't know. I thought it was just her teaching me courtesy and being a gentleman. No, it was that segregation at the time. And that's what it was.
Well, it was the racism. We worried about things when white men would come in the community at night and drive through and threaten our safety. I just have to keep it real. You know, as teenagers walking up, our parents always made sure that we walked in groups. We were for our safety.
The colored kids, you need to play with your own, and the white kids, you need to play with your own groups. And it was hard for me to understand at that time. It was like it made you wonder as a child, is there something wrong with me? I'd say, I know they're not, and the way my mind used to it, they're not particularly smarter than I am. I said, because I graduated valedictorian. I said, so it's not that they're so much smarter, but what is it? And it was mean. It really was, especially for children.
The businesses and homes on Lafayette Street that made up the Foote community were demolished as part of two major construction projects in Jeff City during the 1960s. The building of US 50, later named the Rex Whitten Expressway, and the related urban renewal efforts undertaken by the Jefferson City Housing Authority. The Foote was one of thousands of neighborhoods bulldozed by the nationwide Federal Highway Improvement Plan, an urban renewal program between the late 1940s and early 1970s in the United States. The urban renewal efforts across the country were meant to replace so-called slums or blighted areas of cities with new housing, public buildings, parks, roadways, and commercial areas in the hope of better property values and tax revenue, along with improved local living conditions. Federal funding for these efforts was handled locally as part of city planning efforts. But the roots of the new highways and city rehabilitation often meant the destruction of low-income, minority neighborhoods. Properties were purchased through eminent domain or by the local housing authority, and the displaced residents were assisted in finding new homes either in new public housing project apartment buildings, existing nearby housing, or newly developed suburban neighborhoods. The Jefferson City Urban Renewal Program included the Elm Street Public Housing Apartments and 3 nearby housing redevelopment areas, Campus View, Weirs Creek, and Capitol View, developed in the 1960s and 1970s. Lincoln University, the historically black college on Lincoln Hill, worked closely with the Jefferson City Housing Authority in the urban renewal efforts that ended the historically black Foote neighborhood, coordinating community meetings to explain the plan and process, assisting in relocations, and ultimately benefiting from the removal of the Foote through property acquisition, which created a more desirable surrounding view, in the opinion of campus administrators. The legacy of urban renewal in Jefferson City, as it is in the nation, is divided. Those who point out the development successes from these efforts in city planning are balanced by unhealed personal hurt that remains strong among those with fond memories of a community lost. Randy Halsey led urban renewal outreach efforts to the Foote neighborhood on behalf of the Jefferson City Housing Authority and Lincoln University.
One of the requirements in both urban renewal and public, in any federal funds, is to have public hearings. You can't walk down the street and tell people we're going to buy your property and relocate you tomorrow. So we had community neighborhood meetings at the churches and the other organizations to prepare them for what we were going to try to do with the plan we had set up. And it was accepted a whole lot better because you're always going to have opposition to something new. And we didn't bring all the folks on campus down. We met and said, look, we're here to have a meeting, not to talk about how smart you are, how dumb we are. We're here to talk about how we can make a difference. And it worked. It was try to bring the residents with an understanding of what we're going to do. As I recall it, the main opposition wasn't from the folks in the neighborhoods. The opposition was from outside sources. The realtors, the business people who felt they hadn't been given a shot on the future of it. People react one-on-one than they do in a group setting. Now, in a group setting, they want to say a different way what they want to say. But when they get behind closed one-on-one, the subject is not too bad, nothing I can do about it. But when you have someone in a group setting, he wants to do a little showcasing, but he's altogether a different person, one-on-one, than he was when the speaker tells him what we're going to do. There was one barbershop that held out until the last. That was the Johnson barbershop. He was determined to stay there until the highway dropped cars on him. And then one day he said, well, hell, I'm getting old. And he sold, in that building you saw of the barbershop, he's really the only remaining barbershop that was in the foot. But he lived it out. I mean, he just wouldn't go. They want to know whose side you're on. Are you on? I heard what you said in there, but do you mean that? Well, you have to back down a little bit and say I meant most of it, because you're not going to change, and I knew I wasn't, the minds of people. When their minds are set, whether it's in a meeting or outside, go along with a little of it and go ahead and do what you got to do. And that's what the highway did. That's what we did in urban renewal and public housing and in campus view. We listened, but we had to do what the plan called for. So, yeah, you take a lot of beating.
The most dreaded thing that white men could have ever created in my lifetime. In my lifetime. Now you hear about now you see I got very vehement right there, didn't I? You hear about all what happened down south to the blacks and the marches and everything else. But as a young black man in Jefferson City, Missouri, urban renewal was the most callous thing that the white man could have ever have done to me. To me. I didn't understand it, didn't know it. But as I got older and I was able to read and research and I understood what it meant, I'm angry. I'm angry. And that was one of the reasons why I became a civil rights activist and enforcing the civil rights laws. Was that disparity? I couldn't live with that.
I mean, you live there, you want your old house to stay there, or at least something stay there, but they just tore it all down. From the doctor's office, where that was, just all the way down to here. It just demolished it.
It was gone when I got back home. I could not believe it was like a deserted field. They tore that down. They destroyed it. Just seemingly for no good reason at all. Then when I went further and looked at the foot, that sign that's down there commemorating, but I really wanted to take a sledgehammer and just beat it, because I said they tore all that history down. And it was just like part of my life had just been ripped out, and it was somewhere. I don't know where it is, but it wasn't there anymore.
The foot was just one part of the urban renewal efforts in Jeff City, but its removal reminds us there was a human cost for past city rehabilitation plans that was usually paid by minority residents. We think of neighborhood communities by envisioning the buildings that represent them, but when those buildings are gone and only the memories remain, we are reminded of the power of historic preservation through memory. The Foot is no less important simply because its buildings are lost in time. The Foot lives on in the oral tradition of those who lived within it, and those who listen to their stories remember them and pass them on to future generations. In 2022, the Foot became the first historic legacy district in Jefferson City, with no surviving structure within its boundary.
This history has been dismissed for way too long. And I'm just thankful that it's finally coming out. It has to be recognized, it has to be protected, and it has to be shared in such a way and embraced in such a way that people will understand it's important. Sometimes people in our own Black community didn't appreciate it because of the hurt.
I wish maybe they could build some kind of memorial or something, you know, and kind of talk about what was down there, you know. So at least people will know, you know, when they come, what was here, but it's not here anymore, you know. I think that would be nice.
Not far from the corner of Lafayette and Dunklin Streets, a full-service community park recently opened with a splash park, playground, and shelters behind the 1942 community center originally built for Foot residents. The Foot remains close to the heart of the Black community in Jefferson City. We invite you to contact Historic City of Jefferson to help with the Oral History Project, preserving our local Black history before any more memories are lost.
Well, let's back up a little bit. You have to be prepared for what's ahead. I accepted segregation way before I got to Jeff City because of the school that I grew up in. I shined shoes in a barber shop. It was named Halsey, not my father, but another Halsey. A lot of my customers could come to the door and hand me the shoes, and I'd shine them. They'd come back at 5 and pick them up. So I understood segregation. But coming to Jefferson City, I realized you had to accept what's here and how doing that, someday you can make a difference.
Well, we've all grown up, and Mom has passed on. So if I may, I'd like to dedicate this to my mother. The very thought of you, and I forget to do the little ordinary things that everyone ought to do. And that's how I remember my mom.
My name is Perry Douglas, and I moved to Jefferson City in 1947. I lived in the Black community there, and I frequently, very frequently, went into this area called the Foot. And I'll tell anybody, I am one of the original Foot rats. I enjoyed the Foot, and there are so many things good about the Foot that people never get to hear.